It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. I really missed you, and I'm so glad you stayed right there because it's your feel-good breakfast show. It's Friday, and it feels good. It really does. Weekend vibes, but we have to focus on the headlines from around the world. Now, you may see them on the papers as you head off to work, but news editor Roy Simpson, he articulates these beautiful headlines in such a way that it sounds like poetry in the best way. Roy Simpson, an honor and a pleasure to see you. Now, let's get straight into it. There's a strike. I mean, I just did the news now, and we covered the strike over here. It seems to be getting to fever pitch. It seems to be getting, it's a very, very violent type of strike at the moment. Now, for anybody who's been under a rock, what is the strike about? What is going on? What are the demands, and what's the current situation?
Okay, it's a NEHAWU strike. That's the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union.
Yeah.
It's about the health sector, though. But interestingly, they're the only union that's striking. None of the other unions in that sector, DENOSA and people like that, none of them are striking.
Okay.
And it is, as you would expect, it's about money. So you do have these alarming headlines. The Western Cape, places like Khayelitsha, no medical services at all. The Eastern Cape, Mthatha, you've got pregnant women being told to get out the hospitals, that there's no services for them. And then you've also got a situation where in KwaZulu-Natal, at Stanger, the protesters actually attacked an ambulance, and there was a child inside in critical condition. And apparently they'd assaulted the EMS staff in the ambulance before they decided that the child could be admitted. And then they wouldn't let the EMS staff leave. So there are these headlines, and there's I believe it's the Premier of the Gauteng, or the MEC for Health, directly laying the deaths of 4 people at the foot of these protesters. So yes, it is really, really serious. And it really doesn't play well because it's all about money. They want 10% increase in general terms for their salaries.
Yes.
Government's offering 4.7%. And it's the friction over the money that's led to this protest.
So if you are having this friction over money, does that not supersede the purpose of a strike? Because, you want to be heard. I mean, I don't want to get into strike culture in South Africa because we're going to be here for about a couple of hours. But, I just wanted to know in terms of resolution, if NEHAWU is the only one striking, and it doesn't feel like any of the other unions are doing the same, I feel like a resolution is further away because it just feels like there's less solidarity within their demand surge.
Absolutely. I mean, they're on their own, and there are staff from other unions inside the hospitals trying to provide services.
Yes.
And then you've got NEHAWU's spokesperson, Baxolisa Mali, making a statement that your employer, which means the government, and there's an issue with treating the government as an ordinary employer, but anyway, your employer is telling you that people are dying because of you, but I'm saying, I'm paraphrasing now, I'm saying that it's not our responsibility to keep these people's lives. And that's kind of exactly what we expect of the health sector.
Yeah.
So they're really not playing this very well in terms of the headlines. And I'm not sure that there's an immediate end point. But of course, it goes with the whole package, the whole public service unhappiness with wage negotiations.
There's no doubt anybody who works in public service, I mean, over the past 4 years, that illuminated the fact that, I mean, there's a big deficit there with regard to payment in that particular area. And I know there's good grounds for people to be remunerated in a certain way. However, the irony here, which is very sad and often is the case with strikes, is that the same people who are looking after others, who are creating health and health security, I should say, in this country, are now doing the damage. And that's a sad irony for me.
It is, and yet at the same time, how do they express these issues if they're not getting resolutions through the normal channels?
Yes.
I mean, a qualified nurse in South Africa is earning 14,000 Rand. That really isn't a lot of money. And certainly when you compare it with other parts of government and with the private sector nurses are averaging somewhere around 20,000 for the equivalent.
Yeah.
So they have legitimate complaints. The question is, how do you pursue those complaints? And you were saying something along the lines of understanding where they're at in terms of this money. But at the same time, and across the public service, government employs like 1.3 million people. That's 13% of the total labor force. But they earn 33% of the wages of the total labor force. So there's a huge disparity. In some ways, they are overcompensated.
Yes.
And that becomes the friction. Government saying, we can't pay you more. It's not even justifiable. And they're going, but look at what we're being paid. We're being paid a pittance. So that's the friction.
Interesting to actually navigate that particular circumstance. But that's the situation at the moment with regard to the Nehawa strike. Of course, as things develop, we've got Roy here who'll stay on the couch because we have some other headlines to tackle. One of the headlines, I'm not sure if you saw that, but it says, hold on, I think it's in the sports section, TV presenter pulls a muscle on national television. I'm not sure, have you seen that headline?
No.
That's about to happen.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to Feel Good Breakfast Show. Expresso here in S3. And I mean, you may know Bart Simpson, Homer Simpson. But my favorite Simpson's Roy Simpson, especially when he tackles the news with such poise, I must just tell you. And there was a big story this weekend, and we've been seeing it in all these papers. So, you know, I'm going to tread carefully here. SARS and the president. It actually sounds like a children's book, if you think about it. So what happened was, and I've been tracking this, first and foremost, SARS says, right, that the Cyril Ramaphosa is tax compliant with regard to a certain farm and monies. And then there's a story around the fact that the US dollars on that farm had never entered the country of some sort. It just feels like there's a little bit of, I don't know, it just feels like there are two truths in the same context here.
Those particular headlines, the two headlines that came out, the DA was really, really enthusiastic about the first one, which was that the money's undeclared. So that's about the money itself. Regard the money as an entity, as a thing.
Okay.
Whether it's 580,000 US dollars or 4 million US dollars, whatever US dollars it is,
all right,
it's an entity. It has come into the country and it hasn't been declared.
Right.
Which you're meant to do. If it's anything over, I think, 25,000 Rand. But the issue is that the person who should have declared that is the person who brought the money in, who's that Sudanese business person.
Okay.
So that's the one headline. Then you've got a separate headline, which is Edward Kieswetter, the commissioner for the South African Revenue Service, coming out and saying, obviously with the president's permission, because tax issues are very, very secretive and personal and private, saying that the president is tax compliant. Now, it seems like there's a relationship between those two because we're talking about the same incident. To be tax compliant, he has to have declared that money to SARS himself through his business. But, man, there are so many grey areas around this.
Yeah, but what is compliance in this context? If there's no responsibility, if it's not your responsibility to declare the money, then you are still compliant as a taxpayer.
Well, you declare it as part of your business.
Yes.
So you don't necessarily have to be able to be certain that the money that's coming in is entirely legitimate. But what you have to do is you have to declare that money because it's coming into your business.
Okay.
So he's, in theory, done that part. But tax compliant is actually quite a soft statement. It doesn't tell you a lot of information.
No.
For example, and this is really on my mind, when did the president become tax compliant? Because it could have been 20 minutes before Edward Kieswetter made that announcement. So it could be a situation that, no, he hadn't declared that money to SARS. It came out in public. He then declared that money. Now he's tax compliant. Because SARS is there to collect money. They're surprisingly malleable when it comes to how that money comes in and when it comes in, as long as they get it. So that's issue number one. And then, of course, everything that's in Sandile Ngobo's report about that money, about the fact that the president didn't satisfy him, that it was part of a legitimate sale, that there's a substantial doubt that there was an actual transaction involving Buffalo. All of those issues are still there. And if the president doesn't answer those in court, he's going to land up answering them in the court of public opinion, and public opinion's not very well versed, not very well disposed toward him.
You know how to quell public opinion and doubt? Vagueness.
I don't know that it really does quell it.
Just be vague. Be vague and just layer it over. Just the last thing, okay, because this sounds like an entire hurricane with regard to what's happening. There is actually a hurricane of a different sort, a Cyclone Freddy. And they're saying that this is going to be the longest running storm system ever.
Well, we think it already is. So it's the World Meteorological Organization. They're very excited about this. The previous record was something called Typhoon John back in 1994.
Yeah.
And these things apparently carry on. They move over warm water and they sort of regenerate and repower themselves. So Freddie is on the 6th or 7th iteration of powering up.
Yes.
And John was around for 31 days back in 94. So Freddie was spotted off Indonesia on the 6th of February. So we're, at about 33 days? So it's not official because they're very careful about these things.
Oh, yeah.
But unofficially, it is already the longest lasting storm we have on record.
Freddie, my word. Well, anybody affected by Freddie, of course, we are definitely sensitive to what this could mean to you. So our thoughts and our prayers are with you if you are in those areas. We are hearing 160 kilometer per hour winds coming across the likes of Zimbabwe and Zambia. So make sure you stay as safe as possible. But we will be back with another look at your newspaper headlines in the next couple of seconds. Of course, more entertainment for you right here in your Feel Good Breakfast Show. Here's Graham.
It's my Feel Good Breakfast Show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. This is Expresso, and it's a beautiful day, isn't it? A fantastic day. However, we need to get through the headlines for you and unpack them properly with Roy Simpson, a news editor of note, a behemoth when it comes to international affairs, current affairs, and couch affairs.
I hope we're talking an intellectual behemoth.
Yes, that's what you are. Don't worry. No. You're looking good. Anyway, so International Women's Day this week, and of course we had the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying that this year the focus should be on the erosion of women's rights. And I think that kind of lifted a few eyebrows. One question, is it a fair comment?
Ultimately, yes. He picked the example of Afghanistan, where you've got the Taliban. They've erased women from public life. They've taken away all of the promises that they made when they took over. So that's what he focused on as a prime example. And of course, it's a prime example. You've also got Iran, where in the wake of the murder of Mahsa Amini by the morality police, you had these protests, which are about women's rights primarily, but people are being executed in response. And there's suspicion that the state's involved in mass poisoning of school children as a result of this. So that's quite out there in terms of a fight against women's rights. But I think what also isn't being mentioned that much is that it was in June of last year that the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which is the right to abortion. So this is quite an invasion of women's control over their own bodies in America, which is firstly symbolically important. And secondly, you're talking about 160 million women who are now directly affected by that. So that's quite a step backwards in terms of women's rights. I think that particular example needs to be ventilated more. But yeah, I'm afraid with just those three examples in mind, he's quite right. Yeah.
Sure. And I'm glad that we can mention that as well. It's got to be top of mind and top of the list as well. But there are some other headlines that came to light. Just to move on, Roy. I know you're smiling for good reason here. So I just want to make sure I got this down. The inflatable decoys of military vehicles. Wait, I'm trying not to laugh. Okay, can you just?
No.
Can you just?
No, you can't.
So are there really inflatable decoys of military vehicles in Ukraine?
It is exactly what it sounds like.
Are you like?
Yep.
I just want to know, do they put the pump on, the motor pump? And zzz,
correct. And if you go on the website, it'll tell you it takes between 3 and 30 minutes to inflate. These are genuine.
Are we talking like tanks?
Yes, we're talking about tanks. So this is a Czech company in the Czech Republic, and of course there's a really strong bond between the Czech Republic and Ukraine. So what they've done recently, and apparently they've been making these things for quite some time. They make about 5 a month, I think it is. So it's quite a niche little thing. But what they've done recently for Ukraine, but not officially so, is, the Americans have made a big noise about providing these HIMARS tanks.
Yes.
So they've now manufactured a dummy HIMARS tank. And you inflate it, and it stands there, and it looks like the real thing.
Oh, there it is.
And there it is. And it goes, I mean, that doesn't look really realistic to you and I.
But I've seen the heat of battle, that kind of looks like something.
It does, but it's more than just the heat of battle. It's the heat that one of those radar systems. Firstly, it comes up on radar, and secondly, if you do that sort of thermo reading, they actually designed it so that where the engines are, there's special strips of metal inside there that heat up to simulate an engine's heat pattern. So when you look at it through radar or through any of these, they look like the real thing.
I just hope that when this whole thing is blown over, this could be some use for those inflatables, you know, in other applications as well. It would be very, very nice to have.
They're good for about...
your backyard, for the kids to jump on. My word, that's crazy, though, that they've gone to that level.
All we've got to do now is we've got to get them to make inflatable bombs, so they can have their fake tanks, their fake bombs, and they can just go and have an entire fake war.
So I'm just thinking about the hero that runs up to that tank with a little pin. Look what I did. Sure, crazy stuff. But I must just say, Roy, thank you very much for gathering all the headlines. We've covered so many different topics today, and it's always a pleasure having you in studio. So thank you for equipping us for the weekend. You know what's out there, everything from UN Secretary and certain stipulations over there. We've got a massive headlines and then inflatable military vehicles. You've heard it all here with Roy Simpson on your Feel Good Breakfast Show.